So I am Dr. Janet Beagle. I'm the Senior Director of Graduate Programs for the College of Engineering here at Purdue University. And Purdue, for those of you that might not be aware or familiar with it, we are a large university located in Indiana. We're about an hour or 2 hours south of Chicago and about an hour north of Indianapolis. So part of the Midwest here in the US. I've got just this one slide with some pictures to give you a sense of what it looks like. You kind of see in my video, I'm actually talking to you from my lovely home office, so not a terribly exciting environment, but I wanted to be able to show you a little bit about what Purdue's campus looks like for those of you that may not have been before. The kind of background picture here is what we call our engineering quad or engineering section of campus. Purdue is a pretty large campus. We've got about 45,000 students on campus total. And it's broken up the campus into kind of these different sections. And so this section is where a lot of our engineering programs and their buildings and laboratories are housed. And then the inset picture is from our Discovery Park area, which is another major section on campus where a lot of our engineering graduate students work. There's a lot of interdisciplinary research that goes on there. The Burke Nanotechnology Center does a lot of, as the name implies, nanotech work, and they also collaborate a lot with some of the life science buildings and biomedical as well. And then there's a lot of other interdisciplinary research that happens down there as well. There's an environmental center, things like that. Purdue also has a variety of labs off campus as well. Our Boeing lab, I don't have a picture of that, but that's a large scale civil construction laboratory that does some really cool stuff with earthquake simulation, suspension, and other types of bridges and construction as well. So lots of really cool things going on at Purdue all the time. Right now, we've got about 3,900 engineering graduate students at Purdue. So we are a pretty large program. We are ranked number 3 among public universities in the US. So we're very proud of the work that we do. And we are we're actually the largest engineering program that's ranked in the top 10 in the country. So that's another thing that we're really proud of. Our dean talks a lot about being the pinnacle of excellence at scale. He really pushes for both excellence as well as the scale. We produce more graduate engineers than any other university, which is pretty cool. So in my role, what I do at Purdue is work a lot with the various graduate students and graduate programs in the College of Engineering. So I do a lot of this type of thing, talking with students about preparing for grad school, as well as working with some of our current graduate students and then all of our graduate administrators. We've got 13 schools of engineering within the college. And so each of those schools has a graduate administrator as well as faculty members that help oversee their programming. And I interface a lot with them and can help put you in touch with the right individuals there as well. So that's just a little bit about Purdue. I know the main focus of tonight, of course, is a really important topic, and that is funding for graduate school. And that's where we're going to spend about the next hour. I'm going to hopefully leave plenty of time for questions as we go through this as well. But my goal with the presentation tonight is to give you an overview of kind of who gets funded in graduate school, what that looks like, what the funding process looks like, and then some tips that we'll walk through related to the different types of funding and how to look at those, and then we'll wrap up with just a couple of points on how to evaluate funding offer letters as you're starting to get those from your different graduate programs. That's kind of what we're going to run through here tonight. So to go ahead and get started, if you're not familiar, there is definitely funding available for grad school. This is something that everybody should be aware of. Here at Purdue, about 70% of our full-time graduate students receive funding, and this is fairly typical across other universities as well. Here at Purdue, almost all of our PhD students are funded, and then about half of our master's students. And most of those are going to be your thesis or your research-based master's. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that here in just a minute. But that is something that varies university to university. Typically, PhD students are going to be funded. Master's students, it's not as common for them to be funded. So depending on the universities that you're looking at, that's something to be aware of. When we talk about who gets funding, so we've got these different types of funding, and we'll talk more about those as well. But as you're thinking about your different degree options and what that track might look like for you, this is an important thing to be aware of. Certainly the biggest pool of students that get funding are PhD students, right? And they have the largest diversity of types of funding open to them as well. PhD students is where most of the fellowship money is going to go. And then they are also the ones that receive the most RAs, TAs, and GAs. And I'm going to talk more about these, but these are different types of assistantships, different types of employment that you can have as a graduate student. PhD students can also be externally funded, but for the most part, these are the most common types of funding that most of our PhD students will get. And it's pretty rare for a PhD student to be self-funded. Typically, they will receive some kind of funding from the university or some kind of external fellowship. You might be familiar with some of the big ones, Fulbright for international students, things like the NSF. NASA has fellowships for some of our domestic students. And so that's where most of the funding is going to go, is to the PhD students. If you're thinking about a PhD, particularly in engineering, chances are you're going to be able to find funding. It's just a matter of what type and how you go about getting it, right? The amount of funding starts to reduce as we kind of move down this pyramid here, right? So the next pool of students then that is eligible for funding are thesis master's students. And thesis master's students are those that are doing research. So they're pursuing a master's degree. That thesis component means that they're doing research, and that research is what opens up a lot of those doors for funding. And so when I talk about, almost 100% of our PhD students are funded, about half of our master's students, most of those are going to be in this thesis master's category. They're going to have the same types of opportunities open to them as PhD students. There's just not going to be quite as many. And there are some thesis master's students that will self-fund themselves. As we move down then, non-thesis masters, it's much less likely that you're going to receive funding as a non-thesis master's. These are programs that do not have a research component. They may have some project-based things. You will hear kind of those rare exceptions where you may have a non-thesis master's student who does have a research assistantship on the side where they're working with a faculty member. Sometimes these situations just arise because you either already were working with somebody as an undergraduate student or you already have some kind of a connection. But as a general rule, right, and I'm talking a little bit in generalities here, as a general rule, you're not going to get a research assistantship as a non-thesis master's student. The types of things that are open to you are teaching assistantships. We'll talk a little bit more about them. And then some of these more general graduate assistantships. But they are going to be much less common, if you will, than what you'll receive as a thesis or a PhD student. The other sources of funding that we see a lot for these are employers. So if you are somebody who has already graduated or out working in the workforce, a lot of companies will have employee benefits where they pay for their employees to go receive a graduate degree and then continue working for that company. And so often those types of degrees are going to be these non-thesis master's degrees. They may be on campus, or some of them may even be online in those situations. So if this is kind of a track you're thinking about, if you're either an undergrad thinking about going out and working for a while before coming back to grad school, or you're someone who's already out working in a professional space, this is something to be aware of and to take a look at. Are there employer funding options there for you to go and be able to receive your degree that way? And then we do see some non-thesis master's students who are self-funding themselves. Often these non-thesis master's programs may be a little bit shorter as well. Sometimes they can be completed in like a year and a half, certainly 2 years tops, whereas the thesis masters typically are a full 2 years because you're doing the research along the way. And then the last category that's here are the professional masters. And these are kind of a special subset of non-thesis masters. These are not research degrees, but they are specialized programs. They may be either an accelerated program, sometimes they're done in as little as 12 months, or they may include a lot of kind of industry partnerships. They may include internships built into their actual curriculum. If you have a 2-year program, often that summer between the 2 years is an internship experience that's kind of built into the curriculum there. And the goal of these programs is to really enhance that professional experience, and it blends those technical engineering classes along with more management or other types of professional classes. We see these, just as an example, chemical engineering has some. They do things with like pharmaceutical regulatory compliance. And so individuals going through that program are getting kind of the technical chemical engineering piece, as well as more of those certifications related to regulatory compliance. We also see this a lot in the engineering management space. where individuals are, again, getting those technical engineering courses, and they're blending those with courses that are like a subset of an MBA, basically. So you're not getting a full MBA, but you're taking some of those MBA courses along with your engineering. And the goal there is to have these students then move into management positions in engineering-focused industries. Often, because of the nature of these programs, because they're very industry-focused, and because they may be accelerated, they really focus a lot on that professional development. They have very high career placement when they're finished. These are unfunded programs, which means that, at least here at Purdue, these particular programs are not even eligible for some of these other funding options. So the only options for these programs are to be self-funded, so you're paying yourself to attend, or again, if you're working and your employer has some kind of sponsoring information there as well. So that's something to be aware of. That may vary university to university, but it's something to be aware of as you're looking at these different types of programs. There may be some master's professional programs out there that do have some funding, but it is going to be very limited, even if they do have some. So that's kind of a quick overview as you kind of think about this, and just to be aware of that when you're talking about funding, it really can vary depending on the type of degree that you're thinking about. So I want to talk a little bit about the funding process, and this is really focused then on some of those research assistantships. And I'm going to have another slide here where I talk more about these different types of funding. But this funding process for particularly those PhD students and those master's thesis students, that biggest pool of funding of what they get, you're automatically considered for some funding when you apply to grad school. So your application for admission is also what's used to determine who gets different types of funding. And so if you think about it like this, the admission committee is reviewing all the applications. They're identifying what pool of students is going to be admitted into their program. So into their PhD program, into their master's program, these different types. Out of that pool of admitted students, they then take the most competitive applicants, and those are the ones that they award fellowships to. So these are similar to scholarships, very competitive funding, very small percentage. Across Purdue, it's like 4% of our graduate students are on fellowship. These are very competitive. But excellent to have, right? They're very prestigious. The biggest pool then are offered assistantships, and these are going to be your research assistantships, your teaching assistantships, and all of those. We'll talk more in detail about those, but that's where you're working part-time. That's the biggest pool of funding that our students will have. And then the students that are left are those that then are going to not be funded. So those are the unfunded students. I mean, like I said, kind of in that reverse pyramid, it's going to be the PhD students that are funded first, your thesis masters next, your non-thesis masters will be in that next pool. You can also apply directly for external fellowships, and we'll definitely talk a little bit more about that as well. But those are things that happen apart from your application for admission. And then just to be aware, as a side note, once you're already a graduate student, you'll also find other types of positions that you may be able to apply for, either at the university or nearby. So when we're thinking about assistantships, particularly the research assistantships, what that process looks like is it's really very faculty driven. So the faculty or the professors are the ones that submit grant proposals to receive research funds. So they have a particular expertise in their area. They have certain lab equipment, they have certain expertise and background. They write these proposals to either government agencies, to corporations, sometimes nonprofit organizations, and they say, okay, there's this issue that you have announced. So a corporation, for example, here at Purdue, we have a lot of industries that will come, they partner with our faculty and they say, okay, we have this particular issue, whether it's on a production line, whether it's in a more of an R&D type of situation where they need a little bit of outside expertise. They come to our faculty members, they say, hey, we're looking for somebody to help us solve this. Is this something you can do? And so these faculty members will write these grant proposals and say, okay, this is my expertise, this is what I can do. If you provide me X amount of funding, I can deliver these results. These different agencies then will review those grant proposals, and if they fund them, then that money flows back to the faculty members, and then the faculty members then are basically under contract, right? They've promised something to these other entities, and at that point then they hire all of you as their graduate students to help them come in and start conducting that research. And that's where most of that funding comes from, and that's the reason why it's PhD students first and thesis master's students second that receive most of this funding, because it is very research driven, and these faculty members are looking to hire individuals onto these projects because PhD students are working with them for a longer period of time. Then they're going to hire them first because those are the individuals that are going to be able to dig in the deepest and help them with these various research projects and opportunities. So that's just a little bit of a background, kind of big picture, as you think about what that funding process looks like and why it kind of operates the way that it does, that it is very faculty driven on that research assistantship side. As we think about the different types of graduate assistantship, so the research assistantships are the ones that I just mentioned, and this is where there we go. Muted myself accidentally there. So this is where you're going to be working on research with a faculty member. They're going to hire you on for a specific project. You're going to be working part-time with that faculty member on a research project. The other most common type of assistantship is a teaching assistantship. And this is where you are assisting with teaching. If you are currently at a larger university, you have probably worked plenty with TAs in a lot of your classes. So you're probably familiar from at least that student-facing side of what this looks like. But these teaching assistantships can have a variety of duties depending on the type of role that you fill. So you may actually help lecture on occasion. You may lead lab sections. You may assist with kind of grading, usually helping to develop images and various things like that. So be working with a particular faculty member on a particular and being able to assist with that. And then the last type of assistantship are what we call administrative professional, or sometimes they're just more generally referred to as graduate assistants in just kind of a general sense. And these are not as commonly known because they tend to be more behind the scenes and there's not as many of them, but they do exist. Often you don't hear about them until you're already a grad student and you kind of see a job posting either through your email or someplace around campus, you hear about them. But these are positions that serve an administrative function, as the name implies. So for example, I have a graduate assistant on our team who serves in this role, who helps us maintain our graduate student database. So he has some specialized programming language because of his research and the graduate degree that he's pursuing. And so we hired him on to help do coding, to help debug our system, to watch some of our daily imports that come from different databases and things like that. And so those types of positions exist around campus in offices like ours, those administrative offices. They exist kind of in the libraries area, the residence halls, different offices and areas around campus that need kind of some specialized help. We'll hire these individuals in to serve in that. When we think about what a graduate assistantship can give you, as I mentioned before, these are part-time employment. And so some of the lingo that you'll see will be a half-time appointment or a quarter-time appointment. And you can see the hours there. Half-time, typically full-time is considered 40 hours a week. And so half-time is going to be 20, quarter-time is going to be 10 hours a week. With these appointments, you'll receive free tuition and a monthly paycheck. Or biweekly, and then other benefits. So sometimes you'll receive paid vacation. Typically, if you're at least half-time, at least here at Purdue, if you're half-time, then you'll receive health insurance. And you also, because you're considered an employee of the university, you also receive some of the typical employee benefits. So if you have a family, your spouse can qualify for reduced tuition. Other things like that come into play depending on your situation and the specific offer that you're receiving. So typically, when you are interested in applying for an assistantship, you'll be considered as part of admission. So again, as that review committee is looking through applications, what's going to happen is in your application, you've probably indicated, for example, in your statement of purpose, if you're looking at a research track, then you've probably indicated what type of research you're interested in. You may have mentioned some specific labs or some specific faculty members. Those faculty members will have a chance to review those applications and identify which students they may be interested in hiring onto their team probably have some interviews with those faculty members and identify folks that way. At the same time, at the department level, so that admission committee, whoever is kind of in charge of the teaching assistantship assignments, will also be reviewing those applications in the same way and kind of identifying those students that may qualify for a teaching assistantship within the department. There are some that will have a separate application. Most commonly, that will be related to the teaching assistantship, so that is something to watch for. Make sure you're paying attention to websites for your specific program, because in most cases, you're going to be considered for at least some of this funding automatically, but there may be some specialized cases, particularly TAs, and certainly some of those administrative positions that will require a separate application. So just to keep an eye out for those additional opportunities. And the duration of these, they can be awarded for a full year, an academic year, or semester, quarter, depending on the structure of the university. And all of that would be outlined in the offer letter that you get. Typically, research assistantships are going to be offered for a full year, including summer. Typically, most of your work and research progress is going to be made over the summer. So you don't follow kind of a typical academic year. Summers are not automatically off. Spring break does not automatically happen. You are considered, again, an employee, and so you take vacation day as needed, with the permission of your supervisor, but that research would continue year round. Academic year is used more commonly with the teaching assistantships, and that's when because you're teaching during that academic year, and then sometimes they'll hire on summer supplements for some of the summer courses. They may have a separate offer for some of those appointments. So just one tip that I'll throw out here now is to make sure you're contacting faculty that are doing research in your area of interest. And we talk about this a little bit more later if I speed up my talking here. But the main thing here is, as you're applying, to be reaching out to those individuals that are in your area of interest so that they know of your background, your skills, your interest, so that you can start that conversation. Sometimes faculty will not reach out to you until they've had a chance to look at your application. But it's always okay to kind of send that initial email, attach a copy of your resume, and just keep it very short, very professional. I'll probably say this again later, but do not e-blast faculty. So don't send the same email to every faculty member in the department. Make sure you really do your homework ahead of time. Identify just a handful of faculty, maybe 3 or 4 faculty that you're truly interested in based on what you're seeing on their websites. Look at some of their recent journal articles. Make sure it really is a fit for something you might be interested in. And reach out to them, do a personal email to each one of them, attach your resume, no more than 2 paragraphs and just a few sentences in each paragraph, where you just say, hey, I'm in the process of applying to grad school, really interested in your research. Ask them a question about their recent research to let them know that you've really done your homework. That can be a good way to start a conversation. Ask them if they might possibly be looking at adding students to their research group for that upcoming year, if you're applying for that upcoming year. If you are not yet a senior, you're a junior or even younger. I know we've got a lot of juniors on the call here today. You can also be reaching out to faculty members to inquire about summer research. And summer research can be a really good in to different universities. Here at Purdue, we have the SURF program. If you're not familiar with that, make sure you're checking that out and applying, because that's a very structured summer research program where you can come to Purdue or do it virtually. This last year, we had to do it virtually. But you were able to participate in some research and make those connections. But even if there's not a formal program, you can still reach out to faculty members, let them know of your interest, and inquire, because sometimes faculty members do hire students for the summer, just kind of ad hoc. All right, let me pause for just a second there and see if there's any kind of burning question. I'm going to transition into fellowships, and then we'll wrap up with some tips, but any kind of general questions that I can answer at this point. Stephanie, anything there that you want?
Janet, there's only a couple questions that's come through. One asked about what percentage of students at Purdue receive assistantships?
Okay, yeah, great question. So roughly about 66% receive assistantships. And that's kind of across the board. That's not just engineering, but across Purdue. About 66 are on assistantships, 4% are on fellowships, and that kind of total 70% are on funding.
And the other question is, do international students also qualify for free tuitions for graduate assistantships, specifically for master's thesis program students?
Yeah, great question. Yes, they do. So any of the assistantships are open to all students, regardless of nationality or any other items like that. There may be certain positions that are restricted depending on the type of research. So remember, these are research positions. These are based on the contracts that faculty members have. So there may be certain positions where a faculty member has a contract, for example, with the Department of Defense or with other national labs here in the US, where it's a restricted type of research. And then there may be restrictions on the type of people that they can hire. But in general, just about any assistantship is going to be open to anybody that comes with some qualifications and some interest in that area. So good question.
Janet, if you have an assistantship, does that cover for the full length of the program?
Yeah, and that it will vary depending on the type of offer that you get. Typically, yes. So typically, once an assistantship is offered to you, the intent is that that will continue throughout your program. But there can be exceptions to that. And it goes back to kind of that initial offer letter that you get and what the length of time is on that. Most research assistantships, the faculty member will usually guarantee funding for the first year and then say, that the funding will continue provided that the research is able to continue. That's very typical, and typically then that funding does continue throughout the process. But those are good questions to ask when you receive those offer letters, and to look at that and to make sure you understand what is the expected duration of these offers. Often there are, fellowships, and we'll talk about this, they tend to guarantee funding. Most assistantships don't guarantee funding, but there's kind of an implicit expectation that the funding will continue, but it's not guaranteed. So it is a little bit of a shaky ground there on the assistantship side. All right, let me transition just a little bit to fellowships, and we'll run through this and then get to some more of your questions. So fellowships are similar to scholarships. They're very prestigious. It typically is kind of considered free money, although often there are some work requirements still associated with these. The different criteria for these can really vary widely, so you want to make sure you understand both what you're applying for in those cases when you're applying for them, as well as if you're offered one, what the requirements are. Fellowships can either be internal, which means internal to the university. So we have fellowships that we offer here at Purdue at kind of what I'd say all three levels. So some of our departments have departmental level fellowships, and these may be either small kind of scholarship amounts where they're giving, just a $5,000 scholarship on top of something, or they may be what we call full ride fellowships where they're paying for your entire education. And often that money comes from donors that have donated, same way that undergraduate scholarships work. And so those exist at both the school level or the department level. We have some at the college level. So kind of each school will kind of nominate some of their top students, and then we review them at the college level and award them. And then some happen at the university level. So same kind of process, that those applications kind of funnel up. And they each get more competitive, obviously, as you go, because the pool of students feeding into those fellowships is getting larger the further you go. But they do exist kind of at all three levels. The external fellowships then are those that you apply for outside of the university. So examples of this, the National Science Foundation, if you've heard of them, NASA, Fulbright, any of those that you would do a separate application for. And often that external funding is not tied to a particular university. If you get a fellowship from Purdue, that fellowship is only good at Purdue, right? And if you get a fellowship from a particular department, that fellowship is only good from that department. If you apply to mechanical engineering, they offer you a fellowship, and then you decide, I want to transfer to aeronautics and astronautics, that fellowship will not transfer with you, right? Because it's a departmental level. When you're applying for external fellowships, you often can choose from whatever university you want to take that funding, depending on any guidelines set by that external organization. Those full fellowships, what we call kind of that full ride or full fellowship that I mentioned, it's typically going to include your tuition, again, that monthly stipend or paycheck, health insurance. There may be additional benefits. Either there could be internship requirements. There may be other kind of networking or professional development opportunities that often come along with some of these. And then those kind of smaller, what I call partial fellowships, they come in a lot of different formats. They can be kind of scholarships that are given by, like I mentioned, especially at the departmental level. And often they're used to kind of, you may be offered an assistantship plus kind of this bump up, you know, this kind of one-time scholarship or additional funding. Or they can also take formats of things like travel grants. This happens a lot once you're already a graduate student. There's different travel grant opportunities that you can apply for to help you to take your research and present it at professional conferences. So generally you cannot hold more than one full ride fellowship at a time, but you may be able to use them in sequence depending on how long they're good for. So for example, the NSF fellowship is good for a 3-year time period. If you received the NSF fellowship as well as an internal Purdue fellowship, which does sometimes happen, great position to be in when you have multiple fellowships that you're trying to figure out how to use. You can often defer one or put it on hold, use one fellowship. Once that runs out, then you start the next one. And so it's always a great idea to not limit yourself, you know, apply to all the different opportunities that you can possibly apply for. Typically, most fellowships are going to be available in the fall. So at the graduate level, there are some graduate programs that will admit. Fall is always the largest, but there are some that will then have a spring admission where you start in January or around then, depending on the quarter semester system for the university. And some will also allow you to start in the summer. But most fellowships will actually start in the fall. So that's just something to be aware of. And then another tip that I'll throw out here, anytime you're applying and there's something optional on the application, particularly any kind of optional essays, make sure you complete those if they're relevant to you at all, depending on what the directions say, because often those optional essays are used for funding, particularly fellowships, right? And so they're optional because they're not required for admission. They'll review your application, you'll be admitted regardless of what you did with that essay. But then when it comes time for funding decisions, then they're using those essays as part of those decisions. So make sure that anytime there's something optional, like especially like an essay, sometimes there'll be things like optional test scores. That one's not as critical, but any kind of optional essays or other things like that on the application, make sure you're completing those. Those external fellowships, like I mentioned, you apply for those directly. They can come from a variety of different sources. I'm going to give you a link here in a little bit that gives you some ideas there. Lots of variability in the benefits, the duration, all of that. They can be full or partial. Often, I shouldn't say often, but sometimes the external fellowships will have other types of requirements, especially depending on the source. But sometimes they'll require you to do an internship over the summer if it's related to a company or an organization, where they may have kind of a work requirement afterwards or an expectation that, okay, we're going to fund your education, but then the expectation is that you're going to come and work for us afterwards. For a couple of our international students on the call, this is also something to check into with some of your governments. There are different governmental programs as well, where sometimes governments will pay for their students to go abroad to study, but then the expectation is that they then return and work in their home country for a time period afterwards. You want to apply for these external fellowships 1 year before you plan to start grad school. And a lot of these external fellowships, you start kind of that year before you plan to start grad school, but you can also apply for these even once you're a grad student. Right? So some of these, if you miss some of them this first year, still keep an eye out, because even that first year of grad school, often you can still apply for them and help pay for your education going forward. But typically those application deadlines are going to be in the fall, kind of that October, November timeframe, with the start of the fellowship that next year. So those of you that are seniors now is the time to be applying for some of these external fellowships. So some tips for kind of going about finding funding. First of all, make sure you understand your program's funding process. So I've talked a little bit in some generalities. There are going to be a few differences from program to program. So make sure you're looking at the website, make sure you understand what their process is. There are some programs, for example, that will guarantee funding for all of their PhD students. And so it's just kind of automatic. If you're admitted into their PhD program, you are guaranteed funding. So the two go hand in hand. There are others where it's a very separate process. There's the admission piece and then there's the funding piece. And you may be admitted in, and then they may even tell you, okay, you've been admitted. Now it's up to you to go find a faculty member who wants to fund you, right? And then it's more up to you to then be talking to those faculty members and having those conversations. So there's wide variability there in how different programs handle that and the culture of what they do there. There are also some programs that our engineering education is one example where they bring students in kind of without a major professor assigned, and with the plan of the students being able to rotate among different faculty members that first year before settling down. And so they provide either a teaching assistantship or other type of funding from kind of the departmental level where you're not yet tied to a faculty member. And then after that first year, then it's your responsibility to start identifying those faculty members and get those research assistantships. So I mentioned those few examples just to get you thinking that, you know, there can be some differences. So make sure you are starting to understand for your particular discipline how they handle it and what it looks like. And then consider what makes sense for your situation, right? I mean, I started out talking about the different types of students and the different types of funding that are open to those different categories, right? If you're looking at a PhD, or if you're thinking about a master's degree but ultimately want a PhD, right, you have a very different funding scenario than somebody that's more interested in a professional master's track. So make sure that you're kind of pairing those two things together, knowing what type of degree program you're really interested in, and then start Googling, you know, go out on the internet, start looking for some of those options that you have. And then I'm going to give you some URLs here in a minute to review some of our lists as well. I mentioned this before, but reaching out to faculty, both before, during, and after applying, that's a great time to let them know, hey, I'm getting ready to apply, or I just submitted my application. Let them know that you're kind of in that process. And then a couple of points that I've kind of already mentioned, keeping those emails short, professional, research focused. A lot of faculty members may not respond right away. They may wait to actually see your application, but that's okay. You know, don't be put off if you don't hear from a faculty member immediately when you email them. They're extremely busy. They receive a lot of emails. But the other thing that often amazes me with faculty is they have amazing memories, right? And so even though you might not get a reply, often they'll remember when they then do see your application come through or come across their desk, and they'll remember, oh, I remember that student reached out to me. And that's usually seen as a very positive thing, right? Because that meant that you were serious, you were proactive, you were reaching out. And then lastly, make sure you're mentioning faculty of interest in your application. So here at Purdue, and I think this is true at a lot of other universities, on the application, there's a place where you can list 3 to 5 faculty members that you're interested in. It's not a restrictive kind of thing. Sometimes I get that question from students, you know, what if I list these faculty, but I'm really open to working with anybody? That's okay. What they're trying to do is get a sense of where are your research interests and what faculty members should kind of start by looking at your application. Often what happens is the faculty members that you list in your application, they are actually given your application to look at. And they say, hey, take a look at this. Are you interested in this student? If they don't have a fit in their lab, or they either don't think you're a fit for them, or they're not taking students on that year, they will then often pass that along to a colleague who's also doing similar research. So it's not a real restrictive thing. It's a starting point, right? To be able to list those faculty in your application. You can also mention them in your statement of purpose, or mention the different types of labs that you're interested in working with, because that, again, it gives that review committee a place to start with that application. When you call out those faculty members, they're going to take a second look at your application. So some of the Purdue fellowship opportunities, I've got this slide, and then I've got the one after this. Feel free to take a picture of this if this is information that you want, especially the next one's going to have a lot of URLs on it. But I wanted to just mention a couple of fellowships here. The Purdue Doctoral Fellowship, this is one where I talk about kind of those optional essays. The diversity essay on Purdue's application is optional, and that's used for this fellowship. And so this is for students. You have to have graduated from a U.S. high school, so that's one of the restrictions here. And other than that, they're really looking for individuals that bring a lot of diverse perspectives and experiences. Right? And then the other one, for all the Purdue students that are on the call, hopefully you've heard of this, but if not, make sure you're aware of the Chappell Fellowship. This is one that Purdue offers, but you do have to apply for it separately. So make sure that you're applying for this. This is open just to Purdue students, Purdue undergrads who are continuing grad study at Purdue. So make sure that you're aware of that one too. All right, and then the next slide here, again, a couple of really good resources to be aware of. A couple of external ones and then a whole list here. So the GEM Fellowship, this is for underrepresented minority students. So anybody on the call that falls within that category. This is a great fellowship to apply for, gemfellowship.org if you're not familiar with that. Check that one out. NSF, this is one of the most prestigious national awards. This is limited to US citizens and permanent residents. But anybody in that category, if you're looking at a PhD degree especially, or a thesis master's, anybody on kind of the research track, the NSF fellowship is definitely one that you should be taking a look at. And I should mention the GEM fellowship, that one is not necessarily research-based. That one actually is pretty heavily industry influenced. And so non-thesis masters are open for GEM fellowship. Education USA, anybody international on the call today? Take a look at that site if you're not familiar with it. They have a lot of resources for funding for international students. And then finally, the fellowship list down here at the bottom. It's kind of an ugly URL. I need to get a redirect created for this. But if you also go out to our website, our engr.purdue.edu/grad, and then click from there, you'll eventually get to this list. But this is a list of various fellowships that are available out on the website, all external ones that you can apply for. And maybe towards the end of the presentation, I'll stick that in the chat box for you too, if you weren't able to take a picture of the slides, so you have that information. I'll mention as well, right now, we are recording this, hopefully, if I did it right. So if we have the recording of this, we will put it up on our YouTube channel. So if there's any of this information you want to come back and take a look at, you're welcome to do that. All right, so going to just wrap up here with a couple slides on evaluating offers. So big one here, once you start getting those funding offers, make sure you're considering the cost of living when you're starting to compare those offers from different universities. Can vary widely depending on the location of the university. This is something that is actually a real advantage for us here at Purdue because we have a very low cost of living in the Midwest in Indiana, especially compared to some of the coasts. So that's just something to watch for. Sometimes you can get what appears to be a larger offer from one university, but then by the time you factor in how much it's going to cost you to rent an apartment or have multiple roommates in an apartment, and just the general cost of living can make a difference. The other thing that I'll caution you is to make sure you understand the whole package. And so by that, I mean how much of the tuition and fees is being covered. The way different universities talk about this is very different. And so as you start getting those offers, make sure you're kind of looking through and really understanding what they're saying. So here at Purdue, we split out tuition and fees. And so tuition is always covered and fees are sometimes covered, right? And for engineering students, those fees can be up to close to $1,000 a semester that you may have to pay. So that's something to be aware of, right? Other universities sometimes put them together, and others may split them out as well. So just make sure you're aware of, okay, this offer is covering how much of these things, of this tuition and fees. At Purdue, when we do our offers, typically, you know, we break down what your salary is going to be, and then, you know, you're getting a tuition coverage and those types of things. Some universities may actually just give you a total amount, and then out of that amount, you have to pay the tuition and you have to pay those things. That's the other thing to watch for, and to make sure that you're understanding how much money you're actually getting and what the full package is. So then also just being aware of the stipend or salary, that terminology, the difference there, if you want to know the technical stuff, stipend goes with fellowships, salary goes with assistantships. And the reason their salary, you're considered an employee, so that's money that you're getting because of work, and a stipend is more like a scholarship. So if you see those words, that's just back-end jargon. Your trivia for today. All right, and then expenses is the other thing to be aware of. Like I mentioned, both cost of living, but then also any other expenses that might be part of this package that you have. What are you expected to pay for or do? Any requirements, especially with any external awards, but even internal ones as well. Make sure you understand what the expectations are. Any assistantship should kind of tell you what are the requirements, right? If it's a teaching assistantship, what class are you teaching? Or they may tell you your class will be assigned later, but you know, you should have kind of that information, what that expectation is. Any external awards, you know, do they require some kind of work commitment or anything like that? Make sure you're aware of what those requirements are. And then, you know, kind of a last tip here, you know, it's okay to ask questions. So it's okay to email the faculty member who's making the offer, or the graduate administrator, which is the staff member for the program that you're applying to. make sure you're clear and you understand what that offer letter is saying, and it's okay to ask if you're not sure. And then lastly, just remember that funding is not everything. It's obviously very important. We all need money to live off of. But as you're weighing different offers, make sure you're also really thinking full package, not just in terms of the financial implications, but full package in terms of your educational experience. Right? You want to really make sure that you're going to a university that you're comfortable at, that you have a major professor or a team of individuals that you're going to be working with that you get along with, that you enjoy the environment there, that you think is going to really help you in your professional development and in your future career. Because of course, grad school is, as much as we love it, you know, it's not the end, it's the beginning of your future career, and it's one step along the way. And so you want to really make sure that you're identifying the direction that makes the most sense for you, the program that's going to help you move on. And you know, funding is definitely a piece of that, but it's not necessarily the whole piece. And sometimes it does make sense to take a slightly less financial offer to be with a program that you feel more comfortable with, or that you feel is going to really help you develop better professionally. And those are ultimately decisions that only you can make. But just make sure that those are part of your decision, right? Don't get so focused just on dollar amounts. All right. So then just lastly, a couple things that I want to highlight after today, right? So there's a URL here, and I'll put this in the chat here in a little bit as well. This will take you out to our list of graduate programs at Purdue. And so if you do have specific questions about applying to Purdue, about funding at Purdue, any of our programs there, feel free to reach out to the individuals that are listed on this website. They're the ones that can help guide you through that. If you have any general questions, you're also welcome to reach out to me. I'll try to put my email in the chat. I got to remember all these things I'm saying I'm going to put in the chat. I'll put my email in the chat. It was also at the beginning of the presentation here. I will just warn you that depending on how many emails I get, you may not get a quick response, but I will promise that I will reply eventually. So just be aware of that. But if you have specific program questions, then your best source of contact are really those individuals that are in the programs, because there is so much variability among the programs. So any questions like that can go to them. And then if you have not heard of the Big 10 Plus Grad Expo, this is definitely an event that you should check out. This year it's online and it's free registration for students. Normally there is a registration fee for students to attend, but this year there's not, so take advantage of that. And there is also an application fee waiver for all participants to apply to Purdue for free. And so if you participate in the grad, you have to actually participate. You can't just register and not show up during that event. But if you register and participate, and you don't have to participate in every single event both days, but you do have to engage, then you'll get an application fee waiver as well. So if you are thinking about applying to Purdue, that's a great opportunity there to get a fee waiver to do that. That is coming up really soon, October 4th and 5th. That's Sunday and Monday, like a week from this weekend. So definitely take a look at that. The website's there, purdue.edu/grad expo. And if you just Google Purdue Grad Expo, it'll come up as well. This event, I guess I should tell you what it is. This event is, it's 2 days. It's got some online workshops. On that Monday, there's actually a graduate school fair that will be online. It's our first time doing this online, so we'll see how it works. But we have representatives coming from a lot of the Big Ten, the Ivy League, our peer institutions. It's all STEM focused, so it's all engineering and science related. And so the representatives that are there are usually pretty knowledgeable about the types of programs that you might be interested in learning more about. And so this is not just Purdue. So if you are interested in other programs, this is a great event to be able to come and talk to other recruiters as well. And sometimes they have faculty and grad students as well. If you are interested in Purdue, then we will certainly have a presence here. We'll have a lot of different workshops going on. We've got faculty and grad students from every one of our schools, as well as our professional masters and our online programs that will be at this event. So you'll be able to talk to them, learn more about it. And we're going to have some research breakout sessions so that certain areas of interest, we'll have some faculty members in there talking about the research happening at Purdue. So lots of really cool stuff happening at this event. Hopefully it all works with everything going online, but we're really excited about it. So I hope you can join us for at least part of it. That'd be great. All right, how did I do? I usually get talking and keep running. I didn't leave quite as much time as I had intended at the end, but let me pause here for any questions. Anything, Stephanie, that you want to shout out?
You answered many of these questions already. Someone wanted to know, Is there fellowships available or eligible for BS or Master Accelerated students?
Okay, good question. There's not specific fellowships, specific for that program, but once you become like a full master student, so in that BSMS, you're it's either like 1 semester or 1 year where you're kind of still categorized as both, like you're still both an undergrad as well as a grad student. Typically in that semester or year, you are not eligible for graduate funding because your primary classification is still as an undergraduate. But once you do finish that undergraduate degree, and then you're fully classified only as a graduate student, then you are eligible for grad funding. Typically, not the fellowships because the way you're transitioning in, but you would be eligible for assistantships. And so that's something to talk to the graduate administrators in that program that you're working with, or if you have faculty that you're working with, kind of mention it to them or ask for their advice on how to go about looking for funding kind of within that structure.
One good question that just came in is how can they best prepare for the Grad Expo?
Yeah, very good question. All right, so for the Grad Expo, certainly have some copies of your resume. I can tell you if you're interested in Purdue, once you register for the Grad Expo, you should receive a follow-up email from us asking you to fill out a Qualtrics form. And within that Qualtrics form, you can actually specify like a research area as well as faculty members that you'd be interested in talking with. And we can't guarantee to make a match, but we are going to try to use that information and try to have some of that available for the students that indicate that. There's also a place on that Qualtrics form for you to upload a copy of your resume, and we are sending those to the different departments and research areas that you indicate to let those faculty members know, hey, here's a student that's interested in this area, take a look at the resume, and hopefully start some conversations that way. So if you're interested in Purdue, definitely make sure you're doing that. Make sure you're filling out that Qualtrics. So if you've registered for the Grad Expo and you don't get that email, feel free to send me an email and we can make sure that you get that link. If you're interested in the other schools, a lot of it, I would say, make sure you are looking at the website. A lot of this is coming together kind of just over the next week. The schedules are going to be finalized, so there's still not a lot of information on the website, but I think it will be coming. For some of the external universities, you can already go out to the Grad Expo site and see what institutions are planning on being there. So you can kind of identify those that you want to talk to. And as the schedule gets finalized, all that information should be out there. Put together your list of who you want to talk to, what times they're available. On Monday, the grad fair is going from 10 to 6, but not everybody will be there that full 10 to 6. All right, so the grad fair goes 10 to 6, but a lot of people are going to only be on for like a couple hours at a time. So make sure you're identifying those people you want to talk to, what time they're going to be on, and put together a personal schedule for yourself. And then other than that, kind of prep, make sure you know what you want to do, and then just go and talk to folks. Have a list of questions ready related to the different places that you're interested in. Ask them, do some research ahead of time, look at their websites, identify those areas that you're interested in, and then put together whatever questions you have. And a lot of the individuals that will be at these places, there may be faculty, but there will also be individuals like me who are in more of an administrative kind of high level role. So they may not be able to answer a lot of detailed questions, but they can usually tell you a lot about the process. So what's the process like in that department? What's the funding process like? What percentage of their students receive funding? Those types of things. And those are all really good questions and things to understand about the programs. What's the campus like? What's the community like? If these are universities you haven't visited, just, brainstorm whatever it is that you want to know. This is your chance to kind of chat to some people.
A couple questions. Can a student with low GRE scores qualify for TA or RA positions?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the answer there is yes, but it will vary depending on the program. So there are some programs that actually don't even require the GRE, especially this year. So if you're a senior, with all of kind of the craziness that has happened with the pandemic, there are a lot of programs, not all of them though. So definitely, be aware, some are not. But there are some programs that are not requiring the GRE at all as part of the application because of the challenges that a lot of students are facing, especially globally, to be able to take those exams. So that's something to check on. Is your program even requiring the GRE this year? But then beyond that, yes, the GRE is not, a single deciding factor. They will look at all of your various qualifications, experiences, your full application, and use that to determine who receives both admission into the program as well as those different types of funding.
Another question is, can Puerto Ricans apply for the Purdue doctoral fellowship? Are the high schools in Puerto Rico considered U.S. high schools?
Yes, high schools in Puerto Rico are considered U.S. high schools. And so if you graduated from a high school in Puerto Rico, then that would qualify.
Several people wanted to know if they could apply for fellowships a year before.
Some of the external ones, you'd want to check on when the actual dates are, what the deadline dates are, and for what time period. But typically you would apply a year in advance. So like I mentioned, most fellowships start in the fall. There's going to be exceptions to everything that I say, right? So make sure you are reading the directions and reading what it says for those particular fellowships. But any of those external ones, typically they start in the fall, and you typically apply the fall before. So the fall 2021 fellowships, those application deadlines, a lot of them are kind of October, November of this year. And what you do is you apply now. There's a review process. Usually you're notified sometime over the winter or early spring, and then you would start that fellowship next fall. That's kind of a typical external fellowship timeline.
A general question, is it okay to email professors asking if they have funding available after talking to them for a while? Or is there a proper time to ask this question?
Yeah, good question. And yeah, it's certainly fine. And even on your first email, I mean, faculty members know, right? I mean, they're pretty smart. They've been doing this a while, and they were grad students once themselves. So they know that if you're emailing them, you're probably ultimately looking for funding. So it's perfectly fine to include something like that in the message. Often I recommend wording it something like, do you expect to add graduate students to your team, if you're applying for this year, in fall 2021 or whatever that time frame is that you're applying. I usually kind of word it, recommend wording it that way rather than just, hey, I'm looking for money. Do you have any? Wouldn't recommend that. But it's perfectly fine to include that in your message. I'm in the process of applying, or I'm thinking about applying, or I did apply. I'm really interested in your research. I read this recent article on this. Can you tell me more about the direction you're headed with that, or that your team is headed? And do you expect to hire more grad assistants onto your team next year? That kind of just real short, sweet, to the point, that tells a faculty member a lot, just those few types of sentences.
Couple of things. Can we find written information about where the what the assistantship is, or what it will and will not cover? Yeah.
So when you actually receive an offer letter, then that will have all of the details in that letter as to what the assistantship is. So you may not necessarily know ahead of time. When you're applying for admission, you don't necessarily know what all the different opportunities are that are happening within the department. And that's also very changeable. Right? If you think back on the research side to what that process is like, faculty members are applying for grants all the time. And so often they might not even know, 6 months from now, what kind of research they may have or what type of new grants, might be funded. And so the actual details often aren't known way in advance, but at the time of any kind of offer letter, at that point, you would have an idea of what type of work, and you'd be talking with either the faculty member, or if it was more of like a teaching assistantship or an administrative position, you'd be talking with whoever the supervisor is in the department about that. All right, I am putting just a couple of URLs in the chat in case you didn't pull these off of the screen when I had them up. So the grad programs link, that'll give you some contacts there, the grad expo link, and then the fellowship list as well, if you wanna grab those and copy them into something if you didn't get them already. All right, I think we are just about out of time, but if there are some more questions, I can stay on for a little bit longer here if we want to do that. Let's see if I can pull up my chat myself here. All right, so I saw a question here on assistantships, whether they fully cover tuition, part-time, whether they're half-time or quarter-time. Yes, typically, at least here at Purdue, and I think this is true at other universities, both a quarter-time and a half-time both fully cover tuition. The main difference in those, apart from quarter-time, you receive less of a salary because you're not working as many hours, and typically quarter-time does not have health insurance. Right, so that's kind of the two big things. The presentation or the recording, we will try to post this out to our YouTube channel, and we will send that out to everybody that had registered for this. So everybody should receive that, hopefully within the next week. We try to get those turned around within a week. We'll kind of see how that goes. And when you apply for master's with thesis, yes, you will automatically be considered for assistantships. But that is, again, something to check kind of the process within that department. And it's never a bad idea, again, to be reaching out to those faculty members, because while you'll be considered for them, those who are most proactive are going to get the most attention from the faculty members reviewing. Right? It's just kind of the nature of any kind of job application, because that's really what this is, if you think about it. And then when you apply for PhD, can you apply for funding in multiple departments? Technically, yes, but that's typically not the way it works, just because when you're applying, it's usually your application for admission that is also used for kind of the funding offer. And so if there are, on the research side, it's not typical for you to be doing a research project with a faculty member in another department, but then getting your degree in a different department, just because often those two things go so closely together. Usually the research that you're doing for your job is also very similar to the research that you're doing for your degree. Now there's exceptions to everything. Like I said, there's a lot of interdisciplinary work that happens, and so it is entirely possible that you're kind of working in more than one field. And there's also a lot of faculty members that have really strong collaborations, may have teams that kind of work together, and so you may be kind of working with more than one faculty member. But typically your main funding is going to be tied to kind of one professor, and then whatever that professor's network is, if you want to think about it that way. If that helps.
Question about applying.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I already submit my application, is it possible for me to update my information? For example, my the statement of purpose, or maybe my resume, or is that possible? Or since I submitted it, I can't change anything?
Typically, once you've submitted, you're not able to change it. What you would need to do is reach out to the department, the graduate administrator in the department, and see if you can submit something again. If they haven't started reviewing, they may tell you that you can either upload a new one or email them one, and that they would put it in your file. But depending on where they are in the review process and what their process is, because sometimes as those applications go in, they kind of send them out to the committee. The information's already posted. It's kind of too late to change. Others, it's a little bit more contained, where they might be able to switch it out. So that's really a question for the grad administrator in your department.
And also another question, for submitting, because almost all the students here are received an email to apply for Broad University from either Engage or Engine or Expo or Fulbright. So for that, these organizations waived their application fees.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm going to reapply or change something, do I need to reapply and pay for the fees, or no?
So it depends what you mean by reapply. If you're applying for a new program entirely?
I mean, it's the same program. And for example, I want to change my resume. I already finished my internship and I want to update it.
Yeah, so in that case, you would not actually be reapplying. You would just contact the grad administrator to see if you can change that piece of your application.
I see.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure thing. All right, another question that was in here, the result of funding and the admission decision, whether those are together or separate, and that's going to vary by department. Sometimes you'll get both offers at the same time, and sometimes you'll get the admission letter first, and it will tell you, you know, funding decisions are still being made, and that would come later. And then question on GPA and fellowship or assistantship. Typically, if your GPA is at least at the threshold for the department admission, whatever their admission minimum is, then that would also qualify you for funding. Fellowship, those GPAs are probably typically going to be a little higher. Assistantship, anybody that kind of meets that minimum is going to qualify. And then for international students, a question on the TOEFL for admission. Here at Purdue, if you graduate from a U.S. institution, you do not need to take the TOEFL. That graduating from that university will meet the English proficiency requirement. Okay. All right, Kennedy, I know you've got your hand up. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask a question?
Yes, please. Yes, good morning. I'm calling from Zambia.
Good morning.
Yeah. Okay. I've already submitted my application. Now, when I was just going through again the website for Purdue, I discovered that there is a provision of applying through FAFSA. Is it those four provisions? Now, do those formally apply to international students like me, or just for U.S. citizens?
All right, you were kind of breaking up, so I'm not sure I heard the whole question. Did you say it was about the FAFSA?
Yes. Is it FAFSA? Is it FAFSA? Yes, FAFSA. FSA.
FAFSA.
That you can apply for funding by using that name.
Right, yeah. So the FAFSA is only for U.S. citizens. So that is not something that you would need to fill out as an international.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I think I flew through most of those kind of final questions that I saw. I know there definitely could have been some that I missed, but I don't want to keep everybody on too long. We've gone about 10 minutes over, but I really appreciate you joining. I hope that this was helpful, that there was at least some information that you can apply to your grad school search and application. Good luck to all of you, and definitely reach out if there are things that we can help you with, and we'll be glad to help best we can. So take care, everybody. Have a good one. Stay safe.
Thank you.